And welcome back to Book, Stage and Screen. You're here with Gordon and Samantha, and we're lucky enough today to talk to Geraldine Cook Dafner. Welcome.
Hi.
And we're here with our best pronunciation and diction, Geraldine.
Oh, you sound great.
We'll be on our best behaviour.
Yes.
Now, when I was looking through what the MTC had coming up, and I saw the play John, which we can talk about, but I saw a voice dialect coach, and I thought, oh, how interesting would it be to talk to someone who does that for a living? And I looked you up, and of course, as we do, and what a career you've had and a journey to there. So tell us a little bit about how you got into that field.
How I got into voice teaching?
Yes.
Well, interestingly enough, I'd worked in community theatre for some years, training community theatre artists here in Australia and working in community theatre myself in Britain. And it was working with a group of people with disabilities who didn't have language, but they certainly had sound. And I just wondered where that sound came from. I thought this was amazing. And the sound was so direct, and it was so full, and it was so excitable, or, it was really clear. And I thought, this is so interesting. Why is it that I spent 3 years training trying to do that, trying to do it all their lives. So what is it about the voice? So I had some voice training in my training many years ago, but it was in the 70s, so it was all a bit, touchy-feely probably. And I also had some very strict sort of speech training. So I decided to rediscover that for myself. And I was living in Australia, went back to London and did some more work. And from there, I started working freelance and was very fortunate to get a job at the VCA when Mindy Davis was head of school, and worked there for 17 years as the head of voice and head of theatre and various other jobs I did. But and also work professionally. So I work at the MTC, work with corporate clients. I'm just really interested in anyone who wants to work with a voice.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter, actually. I don't have one particular sort of area that I'm focused on.
Yeah.
I'm much more interested when people ring me up and say, I want to work on this. And I think, well, let's see how it goes. Let's see what journey we can take on that. So it varies. It varies enormously.
So is the majority of your work actors, or you said...
Well, it's interesting that, actors can't afford one-on-one.
That's true.
That's the truth.
Yeah.
So the professional work, all work is professional, but when I'm paid, it's paid by a company such as Melbourne Theatre Company or corporate clients.
Okay.
So that's a paid gig with regular hours and all that sort of thing.
Right.
Actors, I have different rates for.
Yeah, yes. For the love of it, yes.
Mates rates,
Yeah.
And so it varies. I would say at the moment it's about half and half, really.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think actors do themselves a real disservice if they don't get some sort of professional training when they're going over to America, just to clean up that accent before they go. Because I think a lot of people watch TV and film enough to be able to go, oh, I can do an American accent. And they're probably 80% there. But when they drop some of those Australian A's in there, it sounds bad. So
well, I think to be fair to all dialect coaches here, I think once an actor leaves these shores, and they go to LA, they have to pick up an LA dialect coach. Because it's when you're in the culture, when you're really on the ground, you start to get that muscle of the accent, and you're there every day, and you're immersed in it, you're surrounded by it. So you're going to have those nuanced flavours that all accents have. That's hard when you're out of the country. So I would tell, the students that I worked with at VCA, I'd say, well, you've got a good grounding here, but if you're heading for LA, see so-and-so, because you really, I shouldn't say this publicly, but I think that's the case, really.
And do you think some people have a natural affinity for it, like have a very good ear to just...
I do, yeah, I do. It's, like some people have an ability for mimicking, when you're a kid or when you're older. You always get someone who sits at the dinner table and mimics.
Yeah.
And I was one of those people. My mum and dad always used to ask me, I was born just outside of London, I'll do so-and-so's voice, do so-and-so's voice. And so I was one of those kids who did that. And a lot of kids do that in England. We do that a lot but here when you do it, it's not as... it's seen as a little bit more. It's ruder here to do it. Rude, is that a word? Yeah, ruder. It's not as polite.
Yeah.
Whereas in England, people take the Mickey out of people all the time, and that's what comedy is in Britain, doing voices and accents, and so. Even though it's not very PC, but I think does it. Everyone does it.
Yeah.
So yes, I do. I do think people have the ability. Some people have the ability to do it more than others, and it's like how people sing. Can some people pick up a melody? Yes, they can. Others, it takes time. Yeah. I mean, I think the important thing when working with an actor is that you start looking at how they use their voice and what's the kind of voice that they're using to act, and then that's a gateway to how they listen and how they work as an actor. So that's important for dialect work, I think.
And I'd imagine that actors would love working with you because it's, the challenge of it. It's the voice, which is such a big part of their job. To get to work one-on-one with you, or even a group, I guess, to be able to get that, nuanced help would be fantastic. I'd imagine they'd jump at the chance.
Yes, I'd say the majority do. And I think, here in Australia, we're lucky to have actors who are really open to that. I mean, it's a very relaxed atmosphere in the rehearsal room very often. Yep. And I've just finished an hour-and-a-half session with Red Stitch, which is an independent company in Melbourne, and I work with them from time to time. And we were doing the British accent RP, and we had a great time, and there were some shifts because people were open to it.
Yeah.
And I think, and I'm experiencing that with actors at the MTC as well, who in the current show are very well, very experienced actors, and who are working very hard and do want to excavate and who do want to do the best job they can. So I think luckily as a voice coach, you're always in that position where the actor wants to do the best they can possibly do. Mm-hmm. So that's fortunate, yeah.
Yes.
Now you do have you've got that a slight English accent, but you've been here a while, so it's probably less
blended.
I did read an article recently about the mid-Atlantic accent that Catherine Hepburn sort of
affected.
Yes.
Affected.
Yes. Yeah. What sort of accents do people come to you wanting? Is it mainly just the American and English? Is that?
Yeah. Well, interestingly enough, I do a lot of European accents. I love doing those, and they, they usually come to me for something very specific. So, an audition, a play they're working on. Or a film they're working on. So it's very specific. So, and that can be general American, New York, or it could be British, any regional RP or contemporary London. Or it could be, not long ago I worked with a child actually who was auditioning for a film to be filmed in Europe. And she needed a Polish accent. She was fantastic.
Wow.
I just spent an hour with her and she got it immediately. She was because she was a child and she was open and she was...
They're like sponges, aren't they?
Yeah, she could mimic, so we just started to... my husband's Polish, so came in and he spoke to her in Polish. And so she was able to hear their resonance and the sound, and I said, look where you're speaking from, all those consonants. She went, that's so different to Australian. Yeah, it is. So you've got to be really muscular, and she was great. And her mother said she had to do a Skype audition. She said they really liked her. So I get odd things like that, and as I say, every voice is different, so you just don't know what you're going to get until that person opens their mouth and you hear who they are, basically.
And you said you worked with corporate clients. Is that more to do with voice and projection, or...? Confidence?
Mostly. Confidence, particularly where women are concerned.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes presentations that they need to do. They're usually incredibly confident people in the workplace, and they really know their content very, very well, but they have trouble communicating that. Right. And so I work with them on those skills of really slowing down, because successful people in the workplace are usually people, particularly women, I know it's a bit gender biased, but speak quite quickly and try and get everything out at once and live in a very fast-paced environment. So slowing them down, getting them to breathe, getting them just to say 3 things instead of 10, things like that to people, and saying to them, really talking to them a lot about how people listen, how we listen as an audience. And that surprises them, because they think if they just give them everything, and the PowerPoint sheets, people will go away with everything. Of course we don't. No. We listen to what we're interested in. We all know that from uni, It's, we listen to a voice that interests us.
I think it's interesting that, sometimes parents don't want their kids doing acting, like strict parents, because they want their kids doing just, school subjects to prepare them for business. Whereas I think acting is an excellent subject for business, even because, they've got no chance of really becoming a professional actor or desire. But, every CEO gets up in front of his crew and is able to deliver sensible, cohesive speech. It's essential.
And usually
we're really, in Australia, we're really not trained to do that at school, are we? The Americans, just got to watch any TED YouTube thing, and the Americans just have it. They're taught how to do that. That's how they succeed. Whereas our tall poppy syndrome really prevents us from doing that. We don't want to sound pompous or arrogant, and the Brits, from certain classes are very good at doing it as well, because that's the voice of their class and they own that. And I think the Australian voice, in many ways, is more of a challenge, because we don't, although there is a loose class system here and a certainly regional variation, it's it's really hard to pinpoint people, and we don't like to be invasive with our voices either, which Americans and British don't mind. So you've only got to watch Parliament.
Well, you mentioned regional differences, and one of the things I find amazing between Australia and England as a difference, you can listen to someone from Perth and listen to someone from Melbourne, and they don't really sound that different.
No. Well, that's what I thought when I first came here. That's true. And it took me a while to understand why that is. And I started reading up a lot about Australian history, and not the British side of Australian history, which I was taught, but and also the Australian accents. And it just fascinated me about how it evolved. Yes, it's very interesting, but even the British accent. My family live in Yorkshire. That's changing so much. My little niece she's got some Cockney consonant sounds in her Yorkshire, like thank you, which is weird. And rising inflection, of course. When I hear my sister-in-law, who's very Yorkshire, speak with a rising inflection, I go, oh, she sounds very odd to me. But yes, there's lots of variations, even though the Brits have still got strong regional characteristics in their dialects. There's still quite a bit of variation of contemporary movements in the dialects.
Well, it's just that there's so many accents in the UK, from Scotland to Wales to just it's incredible, the differences.
And between villages.
Yes, you don't even have to travel far, and it's completely different.
No, just have to go down the road.
Yeah. Now, we were just talking about before, we were talking box office and the enormous success of Lion, and I was saying how Deval had just nailed the Australian accent, which I imagine we did say we were going to ask you, do you think actors from overseas struggle with Australian accent? Is the Australian accent a particularly hard one to get your tongue around?
I think it is. Yeah, I really do. Whenever I try and teach it, I find that the most challenging, actually. And it's because everyone has, outside of Australia, everyone has a strong impression about how Australians sound. And it's usually from the 70s, and it's usually not very nice.
Yeah.
And it's an ochre, or, I have a friend who was brought up in Australia till he was about 11, and he now lives in England he's my age, and he still gives me this 1969 British Australian accent. I said, that is a real stereotype. I don't know anyone who speaks like that. And he says, oh, that's how Australians speak. And it's the first thing you do. Do you live in Australia? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, you feel like this. No, I don't know anyone who speaks like that. And I think it's hard. And I think the dialect coach online did a great job. There were two actors. One was Dev Patel, and one was the guy who played his brother. Sorry, I've forgotten his name.
Yes.
Mantoob, I think his name is.
Yeah.
And they're both, Asian Londoners. And I thought the guy who played his brother had a very contemporary Tasmanian accent. I actually thought he was Australian. But apparently Dev Patel watched My Kitchen Rules for a year.
It's more like a punishment, isn't it?
God only knows what he thinks of us then.
So I just read that in an interview he gave, and I thought, oh, wow. Subjecting yourself to that would have been a real test of your endurance for Australian accent. But,
you'd want a bit more in the contract for that, wouldn't you?
Well paid for that one.
It's funny, though, when you watch like CNN or something, and you don't really notice the Australian accent just when you're just watching TV here, but when you hear it in the context of like an American show or something, you're like, oh God, that does stand out.
It's Aussie, isn't it? It's really different, and that's what. And I think people still have the impression back in England that it sounds a bit sort of bit Cockney in your nose. And you say, no, it's not. And it's interesting when I teach not that Cockney really exists anymore, but when I have taught the Cockney accent, a lot of Australians think, oh yeah, I can do Cockney, because that's where the Australian accent comes from. And invariably there's an impression of it, but it's not really the accent. And it's because we both, on both sides of the world, we have this impression of how the other speaks.
Yeah. Now, when you go to movies, is it hard for you if there's...
Yeah, apparently. I drive my husband mad, apparently.
That's
what what did he say? He said, why don't you listen to the whole sentence instead of the sounds?
Yeah, I'd admit, I thought of that when I was going through your notes, and I thought, I wonder if it's really hard for you to go and see movies.
No, but there are some actors who make no attempt. Like Kevin Costner in that Robin Hood film was ludicrous. God. I'll show you an Englishman's courage.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and you just, it's wrong, isn't it? I mean, and it also, I think it also undermines, he's such a well-known actor, and it undermines all the great work that actors do. That goes unnoticed, really, because Australian actors are very good at going to America and Britain and doing that. And it's interesting, I've noticed that the Brits have to do it less, or used to do it less. Yeah. Now they have to, when they go to America, they have to do American accents more. But they used to allow them to keep their own voice, in the sort of 70s and 80s. They used to keep because they were well-known actors in Britain. Yeah. But that's happening less and less with young actors now, going over to LA. And certainly from here, they always had to have an American accent.
Well, that's interesting. Now, we can't not talk about this fantastic new MTC production, John, which you've been working on.
All the accents up to scratch? You happy, or are you going to drop anyone in it?
It doesn't say where they're from. It's a really interesting play called John by Annie Baker, who's a fantastic contemporary American playwright. She's only in her early 30s.
Wow.
She's written The Flick. She's written a few which won the Pulitzer Prize. And she's... we've got a terrific cast of Helen Morse, Melita Jurisic, who play the two older women, so it's very rare to have a a play with older women in it. And the two young protagonists, Ursula Mills and Johnny Carr. So we only really know where Jenny and Elias are from. They're the two younger characters. The older characters, there's no hint. The location is Gettysburg.
Right.
But the younger characters come from Ohio and California but live in Brooklyn. And the older ones, we don't know. All we know is that at one point, one of the older characters says, when the younger character says, "Where are you from?" she says, "All over." So we don't know. So because it's such, on the surface, the script, the text seems very simple in its conversational quality. But actually, she's a fantastic writer, and the action of the drama is really through the language. So you really, as an audience, have to listen, and the actors really have to excavate the language. So Sarah Goods is directing it, and she's paid great attention to detail of action, physical action of the actors, but also the language. So I've had a wonderful time working with her and the cast with a Midwest accent mostly. And then what we've done is we've looked at the text and looked at the actor's voice, so that we're really bringing the voice of the actor to the truthfulness of the text through the accent, rather than saying, "Oh, everyone's Midwest." So my job is really to make sure that if they're on Midwest, that they're absolutely consistent with the sounds and the melody. But the older actors, because of the resonance of their voice and because they're older, have a completely different rhythm to the younger actors. So what I've tried to do is to get all the actors speak with their own rhythm of the character, the truthfulness of that, and that's what brings the script alive, I think, rather than have everyone speaking with the same accent. So we've looked at general American, because in America, as in Britain, on a contemporary play, the actor would be working with their own accent, unless it definitely said, Tennessee or Yorkshire or something. And like in an Australian play, you'd work with your own accent. So that's where I've started, is with the actor's voice, and then made sure they're consistent with the sounds of Midwest, but then nuanced the dialogue into that accent.
Fabulous. Well, it sounds really interesting.
It's a very interesting play, and the audience really have to listen, which is, is a test in theatre today. It's a real challenge because we're not so used to listening.
Yes, we are being trained out of that, aren't we? Everyday life. But it starts tomorrow, I believe. It
starts previewing tomorrow night.
Right.
We have 5 previews, and then the opening is 16th of February, next Thursday night.
Fabulous.
And I know that there are matinees on Wednesday and Saturday, and there are discount tickets, and the best thing people should do is to go on the MTC website, which is www.mtc.com.au, and it runs until the
25th of March.
You're right.
Yes.
Thursday night, 25th.
We're cheating. We've got it written down.
Well done.
No, it's fabulous, and a great way. I mean, there's already been some plays already at the MTC, but a great way to start off. 3 female cast in a play. You don't see that very often.
No, and older. I keep saying older women. And what I've loved is, they're also, also experienced actors, but working with the older voice, and particularly the older female voice, which we don't hear on stage much.
Yes.
And the younger voices, and what that is in a contemporary dialogue and communication. They speak, and that's why Annie Baker's written it so beautifully. They speak so differently, but it's a play that actually is a very philosophical play. There's a lot of references to philosophy and theology and the oneness of the world and spirituality. So
it sounds great.
Pretty interesting.
Yeah, lovely. Well, we need to go and see that one. Well, thank you so much for talking to us today. It's been fascinating. And if we ever need to punch up our our dialect or voice, we'll come and see you, Geraldine.
You're sounding great.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Geraldine.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye.